A good video game sequel has a ton of plates to keep spinning, arguably even more than when you're making a sequel to a film or book. Not only do developers have to improve upon the story and characters of the previous entry, but video game sequels also have to improve on the gameplay that drew people in from the start, without being so unrecognizable in terms of design that it does away with what people liked to begin with. Some game sequels are good, others are, well, we don't talk about the others, but then there are the game sequels that hit that perfect little sweet spot of being such an utter improvement that it renders not only the original, but however many previous games that came out before it utterly obsolete. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video game sequels that destroy what went before. Number 10. Sonic 3 and Knuckles. For as much as people praise the original Genesis Sonic games, usually as a means of bashing the modern releases as if they're the very first person to make such a revolutionary statement, the only one to really meet the astronomical hype is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And I'm specifically referring to the game you can only play by buying a Genesis, getting a copy of Sonic 3 with the lock-on technology port on top, and slotting the Sonic and Knuckles cartridge on top of that. Pricey and needlessly complicated, but oh so worth it. The problem with the first two Sonic games is that there was always something holding them back from what they were truly capable of. The first game didn't take advantage of Sonic's speed as much as you'd think, with a lot of slow, deliberate level design, and 2 mostly fixed that, but because the issue was only mostly gone, points where you had to very carefully climb up the chemical plant zone while water rose up beneath you were all the more whiplash-inducing. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the magnum opus of the Genesis era, building on everything that worked while streamlining the level design to make sure you felt like the fastest thing alive at all times. Number 9. Super Metroid. The original Metroid was a landmark title for the NES and began a long line of trends that we're still seeing implemented to this day. However, were it not for Super Metroid, one has to doubt whether or not the game design introduced in that original game would have caught on as much as it did. While the original Metroid was obtuse, not great at helping you figure out where you were supposed to go or whether or not you'd already been somewhere before, and generally wasn't that pleasing to look at, Super Metroid more or less corrected all of those missteps in favor of a gorgeous game dripping with atmosphere that let you figure things out for yourself, but also made sure you had the tools and clues available to do so. Not only that, but moving Samus around has never felt better before or since Super Metroid, and thanks to a ton of weapons and gadgets at your disposal, dealing with enemies was actually challenging due to enemy variety and level design, rather than because of clunky mechanics. Number 8. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Most of the time when a fighting game gets a sequel, beyond the fine-tuning of the mechanics, the developers will also add in or take away characters from the roster. That way, if you like this or that other character, you need to buy other games in the series to play as them. Smash Bros. Ultimate's big marketing hook when it was first announced was straight up ignoring that design philosophy, instead stuffing literally every previous character from the series' past into one game. Of course, this wouldn't mean anything if the game wasn't better designed than the previous entry. Fortunately, Ultimate is so polished and tightened up like an airlock that, combined with the collection of every character from the series and new ones being added every other month, it basically makes all other Smash Bros. Games obsolete. Sure, people will still have their personal favorites in the series, but if your first Smash Bros. Game is Ultimate, there isn't that much of a reason to go back to other games. Number 7. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The original Ghosts and Goblins for the NES is rightly remembered as one of the hardest games in the system's entire library. Clunky controls, obnoxious enemies, vital rules that the game doesn't tell you about, like you need to beat the final boss with the shield weapon or you have to do it all over again. The deck is massively stacked against you. Fortunately, if you still want to get some of that sweet 90s Capcom game design with a spooky twist but would prefer to play a game that doesn't look like us, then you're in luck thanks to its SNES sequel, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The challenge is still there, including the need to replay from the beginning. Nobody's perfect, but the game is just more tightly designed. The weapons are more useful, and you generally have a better chance at actually completing the game and feeling good about yourself afterward. So that's nice. Number 6. Mega Man 2. While the original Mega Man is still a tightly run ship, Mega Man 2 is one of the greatest sequels in gaming history for a very good reason. It takes everything done in the first game and does it so much better that going back to the original feels like a step back in more ways than one. While the story is as bone simple as usual for Mega Man and the gameplay isn't that much changed, what has changed are the weapons and level design. The weapons you get in Mega Man 2 are some of the best in the franchise. The boss fights to get those weapons are iconic all on their own at this point, and the level design has been polished to a mirror shine. Future games may have their bright spots, such as Rush in Mega Man 3, the improved graphical quality in 11, or the multiple endings in 6, but the biggest overall improvement between sequels for this franchise is easily the gap in quality between 1 and 2. Number 5. Assassin's Creed 2. Considering the very different beast that Assassin's Creed has become in recent years, going back to the original games feels odd. Not a bad odd to be sure, but still odd, especially if you go all the way back to the original. The first Assassin's Creed, while an excellent idea for a franchise, was still incredibly clunky in multiple places, with lackluster combat, a protagonist who wasn't exactly likable, and missions that had a little too much busy work attached to them, all of which were hammered out in the sequel. When you compare the two directly to each other, it becomes astounding how much of an improvement it is. Combat is faster and snappier, but still has that tactical edge to keep things interesting. Assassinations are far more creative, with the game giving you dozens of different means of eliminating your targets. Also, Ezio is one of the greatest video game protagonists ever. The final 5 of this list are games that are such improvements on the original, the name is practically the only thing they have in common, and this is a great first showcase of that phenomenon. Number 4. Team Fortress 2. It only stands to reason that when your first game is built out of a mod from an already existing game, almost a decade before the sequel comes out, the sequel is inevitably going to look superior. But even with that in mind, it's ridiculous how much more appealing Team Fortress 2 is compared to the original. Even beyond visuals, there's basically no reason at all to go back to Team Fortress Classic, because everything it can do, TF2 can do better, faster, flashier, and funnier. TF2 should stand as the standard to meet when trying to make a continuation to an online multiplayer game of any kind. It cuts out the extraneous or unnecessary game elements, like the Commander class from Team Fortress Classic. It expands on the parts of the gameplay that worked, while adding on new features that complement it, and it takes the material in bold new directions. To say such an overhaul of Team Fortress paid off for Valve is a massive understatement, and this author hopes the servers are never shut down. Number 3. Uncharted 2. Sometimes the differences that make a sequel better than its predecessor are obvious, like with TF2, but sometimes you get Uncharted 2, which makes a series of small quality of life improvements that all add up to make it one of the best sequels in gaming history. The original Uncharted was by no means a bad game, but there was a lot to improve on. The game got off to a slow start, the shooting could be real damn clunky at points, and the same can be said about the climbing. Uncharted 2 spends its entire opening scene assuring players that all of these issues have been thoroughly addressed. The climbing is way smoother, the combat more exciting, and it starts off with a bang and then never stops until the end. The story was also vastly improved, with more characterization for Nathan and company and higher stakes than the previous games. Uncharted 2 isn't the total overhaul we've seen on this list so far, but there are so many small but vital improvements in key areas of the game, it might as well be. Number 2. Mass Effect 2. The original Mass Effect was a landmark title, but there was definitely a lot holding it back, not the least of which was BioWare, who was for some reason convinced that no one would want to f the badass alien raptor cop or the adorable purple helmet girl. Ah, the naivety of a pre-Shape of Water world. Mass Effect 2, like the others on this list, took what was great about the original, sanded off the stuff that was hamstringing it, and expanded on it until it became easily the best game in the franchise, as well as one of the best RPGs of all time. Now that the third-person shooter boom is come and gone, Mass Effect 2's brilliant and clever use of the cover system can finally be appreciated for actually managing to keep fights interesting, with an otherwise boring mechanic, through clever level design and good enemy AI. Certainly better than the clumsy fights of the original, where even when you win, you don't feel nearly as satisfied, because there was no strategy on your part aside from bum rush and shoot until it dies. The story, meanwhile, has the most detailed branching path narrative that BioWare has done since Dragon Age Origins, leaving whether or not anyone walks away from the final mission alive entirely up to your decisions. Number 1. Street Fighter 2. The primary critique of what got the top spot on this list is if the game in question is so good, such an utter improvement, that not only do most people not know about the original despite there being a 2 at the end of the title, but those who do know about the original wonder why there's a 2 at the end in the first place, when the two games have literally nothing in common. There really was no choice for the top spot under those circumstances other than Street Fighter 2. In stark contrast, the original Street Fighter is incredibly bland, featureless, and basic. An uninteresting, unappealing nothing of a game. Why Capcom decided to make one of their all-time classics specifically a sequel to this release is anyone's guess, but no one is complaining. Street Fighter 1 may be the original, but it sure as hell isn't the reason why this is a world-dominating franchise. All of that is owed to Street Fighter 2, a video game sequel so good it destroyed what came before. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other examples of video game sequels that destroyed what came before. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.